Morning. So it is day 2 of my 3-day trek. I've just left the delightful village of Amersham, stayed dry overnight, and I'm off on the next leg of this journey. It's going to take me from here in the old Amersham through Amersham town and then up to Hemel Hempstead, another overnight stop. So yeah, let's get cracking. So this is kind of an estate of really lovely arts and crafts style houses that were all built around Amersham. It's part of this whole thing of Metroland, this whole idea that you could buy a house, commute into London and you're out in the countryside, yet you have all of the accessibility and all of the trappings of getting on the tube, getting into central London with 45 minutes an hour. So I should probably tell you a little bit about new towns, because Hemel Hempstead, where we're going today, is a new town. Now, it's not one of the original ones. Those were set up in the early part of the 20th century. And the very first one was Letchworth Garden City, and that was first envisaged by Ebenezer Howard, actually at the back of the 19th century. And he wrote about it in his book. Translating the mud here. He wrote about it in his book called Tomorrow, A Peaceful Path to Real Reform. And he established this whole idea of new cities, new towns out in the countryside to serve the growing population and to house the population of London. So that original Garden City of Letchworth was started in 1903, built right at the turn of the century, and then Welwyn Garden City followed shortly after. What then happened was, after the war, obviously London was on its knees, huge displaced population after the Blitz, and a real need for new housing. So a whole new wave of garden cities and effectively new towns was announced, and Hemel was one of those towns, alongside Stevenage, Crawley, Basildon, Bracknell, Harlow, Corby as well, and a few others. So that's the kind of origins of the new town element of Hemel. But of course there was a settlement there for many centuries before that. So Hemel was really one of the first new towns that was built around what was an existing settlement. Talk a bit more about that, and also the concept of new towns that the government has now announced. So talk about that as we go along today, navigate all this mud. So, slight change to the signage now. Shows we are in Hertfordshire. So it's right the way through Bucks. So another county ticked off. At this stage of the walk, having walked up a massive hill. And now I'm out of breath. Talking a bit more about Hemel Hempstead. So the settlement actually existed there since the 8th century. It's a very old historic part of that town. And in the 18th, 19th century, it was a very thriving agricultural market town. Then after World War II, in 1946, the government purchased a total of 24 square kilometres of land all around Hemel and designated it as a new town, planning permission to build houses. Actually, it was only 2 years after that the first residents moved in the late 40s. The original plans for the new town were drawn up by Geoffrey Jellicoe, who was an architect, and he had this vision, and he said that this wasn't going to be a city in a garden, but a city in a park, and we'll see some of that a bit later when we get into Hemel Hempstead.
Mind the gap. Morning, everyone. Welcome to Spaces and Places. Hope you enjoyed Andy's introduction on the Greenbelt Perambulator. I don't know whether anyone's seen Andy's YouTube channel, but it's absolutely fantastic, and he is walking the Greenbelt. So check that out later. Also, a bit of Mind the Gap. That comes from about 1969, I think the original recording of that was. Still being used. It was a question of whether or not we use that or See It, Say It, Sorted, and I just overruled See It, Say It, Sorted. We couldn't have it. But welcome today. It's a Valentine's Day special. I think last year was a Valentine's Day special, or tomorrow is Valentine's Day, but today we're Hornbilly 00. We got our train sets out, and we got a great panel today. Rebecca Causdill from Cripps Planning Team, Andrew Black from Andrew Black Consulting. I've got to say, Andy's mum, sent me a very, very stern email after the last session where she said, will you get Andrew's name right and will you get Andrew Black Consulting right? So Joan, I've paid attention and I've got it right today. Also, we've got James Bevis, who's from iTransport, and looking forward to hearing you on train sets and everything railway stations. Before we get to that, a bit of an update in terms of where we are, what's trending, some of the headlines in planning at the moment. I mean, masses going on. Obviously, MPPF out for consultation. We're going to highlight some of the issues or things we think should be picked up on that. Planning infrastructure out and in force. There's interesting pieces on Nature Restoration Fund, how that's rolling out. If you remember, we had Simon Kennedy on the last session. Well, we're going to get Simon back to talk about how the Planning Infrastructure Act is working out. Flood risk sequential testing. Again, that's one of our favourite little pet subjects that Andy and I have been looking at for a number of years. But I think there's a final decision on that where failures to carry out the flood risk assessment is not going to be an automatic veto. So that's good news. News from Planning Inspectorate. They are expecting a huge increase in local plan activity, so watch out for that over the coming months. Spatial strategy out. Also, yesterday, a little commentary about written reps and a new procedure coming in from April, which I think is quite important in terms of written reps now will essentially be the application itself. So important that is addressed at the application stage. Loads out there, as I say. Good time to announce Places and Spaces blog, which we're going to bring on a regular basis. Everyone who has been a guest and future guest will be contributors to the blog, and the idea is that we keep a running commentary on key things that are happening, and we'll bring each of those contributors back with their thoughts on particular matters. So watch out for that. There'll be a notification coming out shortly, and you can sign up for it. Also, for those of you who are going to be at UK Reef, look out for the Spaces and Places presence there. James is going to be there as well.
Yes.
But we will be there if you want to join us. Again, look out for the notification on that, which will come in shortly. Finally, the Spaces and Places, why do I always say that wrong? Places and Spaces roadshow ends up with a summer gig in Brighton on the 7th of June, where Andy's jazz band are the headliners at the bandstand on the seafront there. So we're looking forward to that. Right. Tickets ready, please, for inspection. Panel. I'll be coming through shortly. We wanted this morning to have a look at a bit more detail in terms of the MPPF, in terms of what it says about sustainable development and the presumption in favour of sustainable development for sites that are, and I'll quote the phrase, within reasonable walking distance of a railway station. Already this morning we've had a bit of a debate about what a reasonable walking distance from a railway station is. I walked half an hour this morning from home in Hove to Bryan Station. That felt pretty reasonable, but I think it will probably fall outside of what is the reasonable distance. But we're going to explore that in a bit more detail. As I said, a great panel today. We've got Rebecca Crosdell, who is part of the CRIPS planning team. You're going to look at and flag some of the issues that you see arising from this policy development around railways. Everyone's favourite planning consultant, Joan, I'm going to get it right this time, Andrew Black Consulting. And Andy is going to unpick some of the key policy changes that we've identified. And as I said a bit earlier, James Bevis, partner at iTransport and a transport planner, will be here to share his thoughts and to give us a short quiz. So pay attention, there are prizes. And James will reveal all of that shortly. Right, we're going to get going. Starting off with Rebecca. Rebecca, you've got some interesting thoughts on what we need to be thinking about in terms of title and planning.
Yes, definitely.
So agreements.
Hopefully, you may have a site that will benefit from this new presumption of sustainable development. So it's just trying to flag the legal issues that you should bear in mind whilst you go through and negotiate the planning and development process. So obviously, it goes without saying to understand your site's title is very key. And if you've got a site that still falls within the criteria but isn't anywhere near the railway, then what I'm about to say is unlikely to have much of an impact on you. But if the site is next to the railway line or the railway infrastructure, you need to sort of understand how the specific railway issues may affect your site and how it's going to impact what and where you can build on site. So as well as sort of like the rights and the restrictive covenants over your site that may benefit the Network Rail land, it's something to bear in mind that Network Rail also have a statutory right to enter into land where they need to carry out repairs or do any works that might prevent an accident. And this goes back to a piece of legislation from 1842. So it's the Section 14 of the Railway Regulation Act 1842. So you just might need to consider whether your particular site is in a particular situation where you might need to plan, an access road that Network Rail might need to use if there's any emergency that they need to get onto your site. And obviously, in an emergency, it's going to be at quite short notice. And also might be worth thinking about your long-term maintenance. Who's the end user of your site? Are they going to need to access Network Rail land to carry out any ongoing maintenance? You don't have an automatic right to go onto Network Rail land, so it's having to go through the hoops of getting consent from Network Rail before you can go on and carry out any works. You may need to consider whether you need third-party land to do any particular maintenance access works, and whether you therefore need any additional rights to benefit your property. Obviously, it goes without saying that you need to engage with Network Rail as soon as possible as part of your process of sorting out your planning application and your development. And then leading on to that is considering planning conditions. The conditions will vary according to the scale and proximity of your development to the railway infrastructure. So you may be faced with a scheme that's got no specific conditions dealing with railway infrastructure. However, for larger schemes, and those may be situated in land directly adjoining the railway, there are additional points to consider. And it's worth looking at the wording of your conditions to ensure that you understand as early as possible the level of detail you need to submit to the local authority to get a discharge of that condition. So an example that we've come across is because there was a development, it's quite a large scale development, but part of that development was adjoining a railway line. and the council included, as part of the reserved matters approval, a condition requiring details to be submitted of any engineering or building works that were going to be taking place within a certain distance of that railway line. And obviously this condition is designed to ensure that there's nothing adversely impacting railway infrastructure, and inevitably it's a pre-commencement requirement. But it obviously, as part of that works, and part of the documents that were submitted, it became clear that Network Rail also needed to be involved in the process. So sign-offs had to be sent off to Network Rail. They had to send back their thoughts before the local authority would then move to the next stage and discharge the condition. Thinking about BAPA as well is quite important. So if your works are going to have any impact on Network Rail assets, they're going to want you to enter into a basic asset protection agreement, and the agreement is designed to ensure that your workforce aren't put at risk when they're working near a working railway line, and your works aren't going to adversely affect what's happening on the railway infrastructure. Unfortunately, these take time. There's an added level of costs that need to be wary of. So understanding how much detail you need to submit to get a condition signed off, just for like the example I provided, is important, because if the local authority insists they want to see this BAPA and it's going to take you 5 or 6 months to get it agreed, then obviously that's going to impact on when you can start on site. So it's really important to understand as early as possible what you need to do to comply with conditions, and if you need to word the condition in a way that will give some certainty on that. Okay, next slide. So Section 106 agreements and SIL. If your development's going to have an impact on nearby railway infrastructure, for example, station facilities, you might need to increase the parking or access, then the easiest way to try and mitigate that would be to pay a financial contribution, either through a Section 106 or a SIL payment if SIL's in force in your local area. However, paying a financial contribution via a Section 106 agreement isn't always as straightforward as everyone would like it to be. So Regulation 122 of the SIL Regulations 2010 requires any financial contribution payable in a 106 agreement to be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, directly related to development, and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind. So obviously by not meeting those requirements, you're opening up a potential judicial review challenge for your agreement. So it may not be sufficient to rely on just paying some money to the local planning authority and then for the local authority to covenant to only use that financial contribution for a specific project, or to transfer those funds to Network Rail, who's going to then use those funds to do the works, especially where the local planning authority has no ability to transfer the funds to Network Rail in the first place, or to do the works themselves, because inevitably it's going to be works on Network Rail owned land. One solution could be to have Network Rail as a party to the 106. It might work for some projects, but for the vast majority of cases, it's just not feasible. It adds another layer of complexity. It takes time to get 106 agreements agreed in any rate. So adding another party who has separate goals may just complicate things, far too much. Where it's been sort of identified that as a result of a development that improvement works have to be carried out to the railway infrastructure, the local authority's main aim is to ensure that is delivered. So you need to think about other solutions whereby you can still ensure that work is delivered. Obviously, if the work's on Network Rail land or it's over Network Rail land, Network Rail are going to want to control that and carry out the work themselves. So we've seen examples a bit like the requirement to enter into a Section 278 highways agreement with the local highways authority. you may be required to enter into a separate agreement with Network Rail to fund that infrastructure work. And obviously the local authorities are going to want to ensure that that contract's entered into, so they may restrict commencement of development on site. So if you've got a phased development, you might want to try and see if you can link it to a particular commencement of one particular phase, just to try and so that you can still commence on site on elsewhere. May not always be possible, but it's something worth to consider. And you may find that you're negotiating your Section 106 alongside your separate agreement with Network Rail. So it's important to consider that the two agreements don't conflict with each other. And that if the council wants to see a copy of any agreements you enter into with Network Rail, that Network Rail are happy for you to share those contracts. The situation may be slightly differently when you're in a SIL authority area. Regulation 59.1 of the SIL regs requires charging authorities to apply SIL to funding the provision, improvement, replacement, operational maintenance of infrastructure to support the development in its area. And then they can apply SIL to fund infrastructure outside of its area if that is going to support the development in its area. So that will cover the any areas that sort of slightly straddling over local authorities. When SIL regs talk about applying SIL, this includes transferring the funds to the person who's actually going to be doing the work, so Network Rail in this particular instance. Regulation 121A requires local authorities to set out in their infrastructure funding statements which infrastructure they intend to fund and the details of those different sources of funding. So in England, local authorities, subject to meeting the SIL test I mentioned earlier, can use funds from both SIL and 106 agreements to pay for the same piece of infrastructure. So you'll want to ensure that if you've got a development site in a SIL area, that you're not being asked to then also pay a contribution towards a similar infrastructure project that the SIL statement's already earmarked monies for. Having said that, we have dealt with agreements where it's been argued that a financial contribution for a project should still be included in a 106 because the argument was that there was no guarantee that they would necessarily secure the funding under the SIL regs. So in those instances, we've had to think about including additional obligations in the 106 to defer the payment of a contribution in the event that a particular project didn't get the SIL funding as part of the SIL application process. So in conclusion, understanding your development's transport impact as early as possible is very important. So getting your consultants on board right from the outset is key.
Thanks, Rebecca. I mean, I think a couple of things more from that as well in terms of what you've said. So constraints and impact, really, really important at an early stage to think about. And I think it's never too soon in terms of thinking about it. So really understand it. Think about timescales. Because you've got a lot to consider, not just getting Network Rail engaged and their consent, but also thinking about the delivery of the project, because Network Rail will have particular requirements in terms of how works are carried out and maintained on an ongoing basis. So it's a real case of think ahead and plan, and these things take a lot of time. And I know some people's experience of working with Network Rail is that I'll be kind that they're not always the quickest in terms of responding and dealing with it. And it's a good illustration in terms of how we've got a policy opening up a possibility in terms of future development, but there are some constraints that may impact how that policy actually unfolds. And I think you've identified those really well. Andy, I know that you're going to pick up on some of those things in terms of what the consultation paper identifies. But you're also going to look, and I'm sorry for the pun, you're going to look at some of the buffers that you might run up against in terms of the policy, and trying to anticipate how you can overcome those in the application stage. So, Andy.
Great. Yeah. No, thanks, James. So, yeah, I'm going to have a quick look through in terms of the NPPF consultation, what's coming down the tracks in terms of that. So, just looking ahead on this, we know that the NPPF is out for consultation. At the moment, that consultation is continuing on into later in March. And as part of that, you've got the main NPPF, and we'll go through some of the actual individual policies of what the government are proposing in terms of transport and development near stations and some plan making elements. Alongside that, you've got the consultation document, which effectively sets out the government's thinking and what they mean on a lot of the things that are in there. So as part of this whole consultation, they announced right in the front of it these 12 significant reforms that are happening as part of these detailed changes. And the second of that is this whole idea of building homes around stations. It was talked a lot in advance of the NPPF coming out. We knew that it was coming. And what the government are saying is that they're going to establish, in principle, support, but actually it says there, a default yes. That is strong words from the government, strong words in any consultation document about development. A default yes within the NPPF is quite a big thing. Talking about suitable proposals near train stations, and that includes on Greenbelt as well. There's no gloves off on this. They're saying that includes Greenbelt land as well, and we'll talk a little bit about what that says. And then there's some other commentary around, well, it's not just development. If you're doing it near train stations, we want a minimum threshold of density of 40 dwellings per hectare, and even 50 dwellings per hectare around well-connected stations. So let's have a bit of a look at what it actually says. So within the NPPF, you've got these effectively lists of what is considered as appropriate development in different areas. And where you're outside of settlements, not Greenbelt, we'll come on to that, it talks about one of the effectively bits of development that are accepted is this one, which is H, which is development for housing and mixed-use development. I think that should be and or, but, we'll cut through that, which would be within reasonable walking distance. We'll talk about this with James, about what that means. Providing a high level of connectivity to jobs and services. Now, again, talking about what's well connected, that there is a footnote in there. Government love a footnote, and that footnote 26 tells you what they mean when they talk about well connected. These train stations that are in the top 60 travel to work areas. Again, James is going to talk us through this because it's all quite complicated. And then talking about the connectivity that those have in normal weekday timetables, having effectively 4 trains an hour or 2 trains per hour. But there's also talk about reasonable prospects of being served to planned upgrades. What does that mean? What does reasonable prospect mean? How do we secure what those planned upgrades are, like Rebecca was talking about with how that's all going to come forward in terms of Section 106, how you secure that. It's all the devil's in the detail, as always. And then talking about not prejudicing proposals for long-term comprehensive development in the same location. So we've got some bits within the policies that are quite prescriptive, quite defined. We've got other bits that are open into interpretation, open for planning balance. So there's quite a lot to sort of think about, but having this sort of other category of acceptable development is a big shift that we're seeing. And that also includes development within the Greenbelt also. So it talks effectively, again, development which is not inappropriate. We love the double negatives in the NPPF, but it's talking about the same thing. So that H, development in there, is the same as it said on the previous slide. It's just bullet pointed out. Why the government can't be consistent in their approach to these things, I don't really know. It's the same thing, spelt slightly differently, laid out slightly differently. And then we've got this last bit at the bottom there that's in the case of major development, comply with policy GB8. That's the golden rules. We've talked a bit about them before. But again, this is showing that development in the Greenbelt, if you're near a train station, it's not inappropriate. So again, we've got this kind of area that we can go into on that.
Isn't there also a directive at the planned stage to be considering the green belt where the green belt touches or is in close proximity to the connected stations?
Yeah.
So actually, at the review stage, they're saying, look at it now.
Correct.
Yeah.
There's
Which I think is very, very directive.
Yeah, and there's a bit of wording in there that we'll talk about on that. This whole talk about minimum densities, I don't think we've got enough time to talk about this in detail, so it's probably for another day, but talking about, again, those minimum densities that we're going to have around railway stations. Quite high densities, again, the government have defined what they mean by net developable area within that as well. When you look at that, actually, they're talking about including access roads, garden space, car parking areas, open space, children's play areas. So your 50 dph, if you're including all that, it's going to be quite a dense development, in my opinion, and I think that's going to be changing quite a lot of things. Again, it's all out for consultation. We don't know what's exactly going to happen, but it's clear thinking on that. What you were talking about, James, is this whole thing around plan making, and the government have always been clear that in terms of altering greenbelt boundaries, that should be done through local plans. It used to be that you had to demonstrate exceptional circumstances, and that was your point of looking at greenbelts. What they're now saying is, if it would enable development of land around stations, that's great, alter your greenbelt, or exceptional circumstances. But if it can unlock development around stations, you don't need to go too much further. That's the test. That's it. You're done. You can allocate it. But what is that, in terms of how that works and how this comes into plan making, the NPPF splits things up into development management policies and into plan making policies. And in plan making terms, they're talking about this vision-led approach for planning for transport. And what they're effectively saying, there's a lot of words on that screen there, but it's clear that they're saying sustainable transport should be considered from the earliest stages of plan making. So you've got to be looking at that right at the outset, talking about plans, again, aligning with other strategies, with local transport plans, with cycling, with walking infrastructure, all of those things right at the outset. But this part B is quite interesting, that they're talking about, when you're looking at sites, locating development where it can support sustainable patterns of growth, and they're bringing in this idea of connectivity tool. We might talk about that if we've got time today, and that being a real key part of the evidence for site selection as well. So it's quite an important thing of how we're going to be seeing sites coming forward. Another question for James when it comes to it, we're talking about in D, transport choice, including networks for walking and cycling, public transport and wheeling. I want to know what wheeling is, James, later, so we're going to talk about that. And then just finally, this is the connectivity, the connectivity tool. This is how it works. This is Oxted, a place that I know well. I'm there all the time. And that's showing how that connectivity tool works for somewhere like Oxted, where effectively the yellow bits there are the higher connectivity around the station. But look, as you go outside Oxted to the edge where there's greenbelt sites, your connectivity is starting to get quite low. And this is where it's going to come into. I think there's a lot in the NPPF that you could use, and you could say, great, that directs growth and density and unlocking sites. There's equally things in the NPPF that a local authority, not picking at Sandridge, but any local authority could say, well, that's all very well and good, but it's not well connected enough, or it doesn't pass those tests, or there's not any other bits in there. So a lot for interpretation, a lot that's out for consultation. That will run until 23rd of March. We probably won't see much before the summer, but I think we're in a really interesting place on this. So that's it for me.
Tool, the connectivity tool, that's on the gov.uk site, isn't it? You can go and
click on it and have a play around with it.
Play with that to your heart's content,
Yeah.
I think.
See how well connected you are.
Really, really good, Andy. Some really, really nice setting of the scene in terms of where we are with the consultation. You've mentioned that we've still got another month, so it's important that people use that time to consider points that we're identifying, or points other people are identifying, and go back on that consultation to effect some change.
Yeah.
Okay, now I promised you a quiz. I promised you prizes. I haven't told you what those prizes are yet, but we will reveal those shortly. Our next guest, James Bevis. James, I've got to ask you, have you got a train set?
Yeah, of course. Yes. It was my lockdown project in the roof, in the attic.
Extensive, elaborate?
Yeah, so
Are we talking Rod Stewart here, or are we talking...
probably half a rod. I
Half
don't know
a
what
rod.
that actually means in terms of what pop star would be. That probably Kelly Jones. from
Probably Kelly
the
Jones.
Stereophonics. Yeah, so it was. My children had various bits of Hornby which they'd collected through their childhood, and I put it together in terms of model railway in our attic during lockdown. It kept me busy, engaged me with something creative. It was actually very good for my well-being.
That's great. And you're at iTransport. You're a transport planner.
Yes.
Covering...
For not saying nerd, that's kind.
I didn't say no. Covering all things transport, essentially.
That's right. We do the transport bit from I've got a site, can I develop it, through to getting planning permission, effectively.
Okay. Right. Take us through what you're seeing, what you're thinking. What's your take on the changes are.
Okay. So I thought we'd sort of start with the transport criteria, and then we'll move on to a quiz, and it'll be interesting to see if you can spot a well-connected station or not, and I think people can probably play along at home as well if they want to. Andy's picked up where it sits within the MPPF. I think we're going to need to get to grips with how to refer to the paragraphs in the MPPF going forward, because it's not quite as neat as what I like, which was paragraph 110, paragraph 115. Paragraph S51H doesn't quite have quite the same ring, but the two areas which Andy picked up, one is the policy for development outside of settlement boundaries but not within the Greenbelt, and the second bit is development in the Greenbelt. And you have to be within reasonable walking distance of a railway station which provides a high level of connectivity to jobs and services. What is a reasonable walking distance, I think, is the question that I keep getting asked, and I'm sure we've all thought what that means. The lazy transport planning answer to that is 800 metres, because that's what it said in a bit of IHT guidance from about 20 or 30 years ago. I don't think that's the right answer, personally. The 800 metres doesn't seem to have any basis in fact whatsoever. I've done a little bit of research around it, and the closest I can get to it is one. It seems to go back to Victorian times, and it was a rule of thumb used by people developing around railway stations, funnily enough, as in that was the most valuable bit of land to develop because it was near to the railway station. The only guidance that I've found sort of in history was something from, I've got it here, Clarence Perry's Neighbourhood Unit from 1929, which was to do with planning neighbourhoods in New York, and that related to what is the distance a child is prepared to walk to an elementary school, which was 800 metres, and that ended up becoming what we now know as a walkable neighbourhood. I think that's the basis for that. And also then the distance to a transit station as well. But simply put, the 800 metres doesn't have any basis other than it's a made-up number. And if you look at, for example, TfL and the calculations that you use for your public transport accessibility levels, they use 960 metres. There was a bit of research a few years ago which identified the average walking distance to a railway station was around 1.2 kilometres. And James, you walked 1.5 miles to a railway station this morning, which is about half an hour walk, and people are prepared to walk further. And again, it comes back to lazy transport planning, but it's not just about distance. It's about the quality of the route, the gradient. Is it lit? Has it got surveillance? Is it a decent route? And so I think prescribing 800 metres, which is the answer Matthew Pennycook gave to a parliamentary question, if it does end up as being interpreted as 800 metres, I think that's the wrong answer, and it's going to be too restrictive. But we'll come on to some of that in a minute as we go through the quiz.
Given what Andy said in terms of it being a presumption of yes, if you can show the connectivity, that 800 metres it's going to be, or the distance is going to be really significant.
The distance is, but it's part of an overall. I think there's nuances, and I think prescribing 800 metres is the wrong thing to do. I think, in actual fact, I think it's a good policy overall, and I think there's a matter of judgment, a planning judgment, and planners have judgment, inspectors have judgment. I think transport planners should have a bit of judgment as well. And I think, as I said, we can pick away at this policy, but it's a really good policy because it's going to promote people building stuff where they should be building around railway stations. And there are some absurdities, as we'll come on to, but overall it is a really good policy. And I think there's a reason that Zach Simons identified it as his, Planner Act's planning policy of the year last year. It is a really good policy. So I don't think we should be too sniffy about what the government are trying to achieve.
Okay.
And then the other two criteria, you have to be in a top 60 travel to work area ranked by gross value added. So that really relates to access to jobs. I know that it talks about jobs and other services, but that is a ranking of the contribution to the UK economy. And then you need 4 trains per hour throughout the daytime, unless, and it's 2 trains in each direction, in actual fact, rather than 4 trains per hour, unless you're at a terminus, in which case it's 2 trains going in one direction. So they're the criteria. So I thought, and one of the questions you asked me beforehand, James, where can I find this information? In terms of where you can find the GVA, that's on the Office for National Statistics website. Map It is really useful. You just type in a postcode and that tells you also, your planning area, your travel to work area. So it's actually quite easy information to get out, and you just need to be a little bit careful about how you rank it. I misranked. I don't understand Excel properly, and I thought Luton was about 114th, and it actually ends up as the 16th most important travel to work area in the country.
Change.
I don't think so. No, I think they have been fixed for quite a while. Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're going to see a Sunday Times top 60 travel to work guide, aren't we? It's going to be published each year.
Well, if it does land up at top 60, I think as we come on to it, I think top 60 is probably the wrong. It creates some absurdities in terms of where you might develop with this default yes. So should we move on to a quiz? And
Yes.
I've been given the clicker, so I'm going to need to work out how to do this. There you go. It's a Natalie titled. I can't bother to read that out really, but it really is it a well-connected station? Are we within reasonable walking distance of it? So it'll be interesting to see what you think. The first one. Emsworth, Hampshire. Southern Railway, London Victoria's 49 minutes away, Brighton's just over an hour, Southampton's 51 minutes away, and the great and mighty Portsmouth is only 23 minutes away. Is that a well-connected station?
I'm going to yes. I'm going to go yes.
I'd say yes.
I'd say yeah.
And
Emsworth is.
Yes, it is. And it's in the Portsmouth travel to work area, which is the 30th out of the top 60. So next one. Southbourne.
It's just down the road.
It is just down the road. So West Sussex. Again on Southern Railway.
Chichester, isn't it?
Chichester District, West Sussex.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Sorry, you're talking to a transport plan. I deal with counties mainly and highway authorities rather than local plan areas.
Sorry.
London Victoria 45 minutes away, Brighton 58 minutes, Portsmouth 30 minutes, Southampton 53.
Must be yes, because it's got to be one stop from Emsworth, isn't it?
I'm not sure.
Rebecca?
I'd say yes.
I'm going a no.
Ooh. There we go. No.
Oh.
Unbelievably, because it's in Chichester and Bognor Regis travel to work area, that's 79th in terms of the ranking. And then if you look at the next slide, you can see the slight absurdity in this. That you can see Emsworth, they're both at the top in the middle. Emsworth and Southampton and Southbourne are 2 minutes apart by train, but one is a well-connected station in the NPPF terminology, and one isn't.
So anything going east is not well connected from Emsworth.
If you're in the Chichester and Bognor Regis area, then yeah.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So it's a slight absurdity, I think. Thatcham, West Berkshire, 48 minutes to Paddington, 24 minutes to Reading, 8 minutes to Newbury, Great Western Railway services.
I'm going to go a yes for this one because I'm just feeling really bold. I'm looking forward to that prize.
Yes, because it's straight into Paddington, isn't it, from there? So
Yeah,
I know it was.
Yes, I would have thought so.
No.
Oh.
Newbury travel to work area is 82nd in terms of the travel to work areas,
That's so weird, given Newbury and the connectivity from Newbury into London.
And there has been talk, well, why isn't it not the top 80? And I think various people, I think Litchfield and others have suggested this. But then you miss, even if you go to the 80th, you're missing out on some sort of fundamentally accessible areas. Ashford in Kent. So this is Ashford International Station. South Eastern Railway services. St Pancras is 38 minutes away. You can get to Canterbury in 23 minutes. Dover's 30 minutes away. You can't get to Paris directly anymore, and you haven't since 2020, but apparently they're reviewing the services again this year, so it might come back, and if that does come back, you're less than 2 hours from Paris.
I'm going to go yes for that one.
It's got to be yes, isn't it?
I thought so.
Separate.
Yeah.
I'd be...
No and no.
Oh.
I think the trouble with Ashford is, one is Ashford is the 117th travel to work area in the country.
Wow.
So it's sort of handicapped by its hinterland, I think. But also because it's a policy that applies to development outside of settlement boundaries, for someone like Ashford, if it is 800 metres or even if it's a bit further, you're going to struggle to find a site outside of the settlement boundary, which is within a potentially onerous walking distance, unless that walking distance is sort of something which is considered more generously. And in the context of Ashford, where you've got some of the best train services in the country, people will walk further because the quality and the frequency of the train services are so good.
It's such a good point where you've got a big settlement where pretty much the whole of the settlement takes you up to 800 metres, and then your edge of that, it knocks it out, doesn't it, as a site? So.
And if we're building lots of houses around these stations, the site itself, probably the back end of the site is going to be beyond 800 metres as well.
Wow, okay.
Colchester, so Essex, Greater Anglia services, less than an hour into Liverpool Street, 20 minutes to Ipswich.
Well, this is the home of Blur, isn't it? Colchester. So, I mean, it's a bit hazy, I think, on this one. I'm going to go no.
Having been stuck in Colchester after the football, I'd say no.
Yeah.
Just because I had a horrible journey back.
That's just sort of anti-Colchester prejudice. But you're right, because Colchester's the 76th travel to work area, so it's outside the top 60 at the moment. And it's another one of these ones where, there's an awful lot of development going to happen in and around Colchester. And there are sites within a reasonable walking distance. And, if you look at other outside of the top 60 travel to work areas, Doncaster, Cheltenham, Bath, Durham, Swansea, Plymouth, Canterbury, Worcester, Chesterfield, Kettering, Harrogate, there's some pretty significant places which aren't going to benefit from this default yes. Last one, Tring. West Midland trains, 40 minutes into Euston, 23 minutes to Milton Keynes.
Ooh. There's a lot of space around it. I'm going to go yes for this one. I think that's my judgment on the.
Yeah, I would say yes, but it's a weird station. I've been to Tring Station before, and it's nowhere near Tring. It's one of those stations, isn't it? That it's like middle of nowhere. So, but it should be, but it is.
Yeah, there's one. Yeah, I was about to say it's one of those that doesn't look like it should be.
Yeah,
it is, and it ticks all the boxes. And crikey, I don't think we're doing anything around it, but if you've got land around Tring Station, I'd be getting pretty excited right now.
Yeah.
It's in the Luton travel to work area, which is 16th. But this is, I think, Aldbury, which is the settlement, which is about the same distance from the station as Tring is. And I suppose are you really going to be developing at 50 dwellings per hectare around somewhere like Tring? Is that appropriate? And perhaps it is. It's going to require careful design. But I suppose it comes into some of the issues around, are you actually going to be able to sell the dwellings at that sort of density? Because you're right, Andy, it includes car parking areas and the internal roads and things like that. These are going to be car-light, car-free schemes. Are you really going to want to live without a car in somewhere like Tring? Potentially, but not at the moment because it's just a load of green fields. So that was my quiz.
Liked it.
Thank you.
I was rubbish, but it was good.
I don't know who won.
I'm not sure.
I think it might have been James, actually.
I'm not sure who won yet, but prize is
the development industry is the winner.
Exactly. A prize is to walk with Andy on his next leg of the Greenbelt tour. Andy, questions for James? What have we got?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many different bits around how you unpick elements of this. One of the bits I was going to ask was, I was looking at a site a while ago and talking about, this is getting down to the kind of nitty gritty of it, James, but where you is talking about 4 trains per hour, I've got a site that's near a station that would tick all the boxes, but it's only 4 trains per hour in the morning and evening peak. So that would fall outside of it. I mean, do you think we've got some more sort of tidying up of those, the kind of footnotes and the wording of it? I mean, surely that's when you need it most, isn't it?
Well, I think so, because it's about travel to work areas, isn't it? And so people travel all sorts of times now. We've got more flexible working and that sort of thing, but predominantly people do travel in the peak periods. And so I think this is where it comes into winners and losers. And when you set a hard target, 4 trains per hour, 2 trains per hour in each direction throughout the day, 800-metre walking distance, top 60 travel to work area, you're always going to get winners and losers. And I'm not a planner. I wouldn't want to be drafting national policy. But how you deal with the grey area of sites on the periphery seems an important thing to consider. I think it's going to be interesting to see, 1, where the policy ends up, and 2, how it's interpreted. And I think we're going to probably spend a lot of time in front of planning inspectors going forward, having discussions about this.
Interesting question from Debbie Chung. Which picked up on a couple of points that you talked about earlier in terms of planners having views, planners having opinions about matters. So she says, given that local planning authorities often remain cautious, even when national planning policy appears supportive, what strategies do you recommend for bridging the gap between what we're seeing in the NPPF ambitions and the local transport transport officers' requirements?
Oh my word, that's a really tough question, and I think that just goes back to, I think, planning in general. We've always had policies which are supportive of development, and we've always had some local authorities being resistant to that development, a can't-do attitude, and I suppose there's probably 2 or 3 ways of dealing with it. I think one is try your best and early dialogue. And the other approach is, well, if they're not going to listen and they're not going to play ball, get in front of an inspector as quickly as possible. And I think, and that's a big cost, big risk decision. And once we start seeing some planning inspectors allowing this and the Secretary of State allowing these schemes, it may focus everyone's minds a little bit. But it's clearly a pro-development policy. And if it's implemented properly, it's going to unlock an awful lot of development.
Oh, good. A couple of people have been asking, where do we find the data list of the top 60 areas? Well, we'll stick that on our link at the end. You mentioned it a few moments ago.
Yeah, the Office of National Statistics. I think it's table 2 or 3. Which one?
We'll get there. A question from Mark Eshelby, which is, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how NPPF changes might play out on the ground, especially near constrained sites. Andy, is that one for you or is that one for James?
What was it? Sorry, say the question again, James.
Sorry. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how NPPF changes might play out on the ground, especially near constrained sites.
Yeah. Well, I think this is what James was saying about that planning balance. And around, you're going to have scenarios where you've got, and this is in a plan-making scenario, where you would have a station, and a site within that would tick all the boxes next to those stations, but you may have other constraints in there, alongside Greenbelt, other landscape constraints, other things. So it's kind of looking at it in the round, and it's trying to make sure that you're kind of looking at where the suitable sites are, what can come into that, what the material considerations are that can go to improving matters, improving connectivity, improving elements to other things. So there's a lot to kind of put in there, and I think it's about, it comes down to having those sites at a very early stage of local plan process and demonstrating all those constraints, but demonstrating how your site can overcome it or mitigate them. And I think transport's a big one of those, but you've got to look at it in the round as well. It's not just transport, it's it's everything, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
I think you need to look at it with pragmatism as well, and you can see with this, you need to be within walking distance of a well-connected station, and then the next thing, well, is your footway continuously 2 meters wide all the way from your site to the railway station? There's very few sites where that's going to be achieved because we're dealing with a historic network in a lot of cases, and pragmatism and considering things in the round. Is it a good route? Do people use it? Is it safe? Rather than blinkedly just applying onerous requirements which can't be achieved.
one other question I had was that it talks about planned infrastructure improvements as well, and where would you go to find out what those are? And is it so? First of all, where would you go to find out what they are? But secondly, is it something that's in the gift of a developer to look at infrastructure improvements to services, or is that very much a Network Rail thing or an operator thing?
Well, it's the gift of providing increased frequency comes from the operators primarily, and obviously the rail industry is changing with sort of everything being brought back in, being nationalised effectively. But I think that you've got to be careful, because I think you could end up in some sort of frequency trap, which is where you're building a load of houses, they're going to use the rail service, and they should likely to perhaps justify more frequent services alongside other things that may be happening in the area, but you can't guarantee it because it's not in your gift as the developer. But I think the wording of the NPPF is pretty good in that. I think it talks about reasonable prospect,
Yes,
doesn't it,
exactly.
rather than absolute guarantee. So it would be early engagement with Network Rail, early engagement with the operators, and a letter of support saying if you build this, then we are very likely to do that. Might be enough, but it depends perhaps on your your decision maker, and whether they're wanting everything to be sort of agreed and in detail, or they're willing to apply a bit of flexibility and pragmatism. Yeah. I didn't answer the question of where you might find that information.
Yeah,
my starting point would be the internet.
ChatGPT.
Yeah, ChatGPT, absolutely.
Is there a minimum size of development that this scheme applies to?
No. I mean, we're talking in Greenbelt terms, talking about kind of more major development, but that could be anything over 10 units. So it can apply to smaller schemes. Absolutely, there's nothing to say that there's a bar to it.
It is a very good point. Okay, I'm just looking. Any more questions, Andy? Have you anything else? Any difficult ones up your sleeve for James?
I don't think there was anything on. You've got my list in front of you,
Rebecca?
James. I didn't. Is there anything else on my list?
Well, should we talk about Network Rail?
Yeah,
Engagement with Network Rail.
Yes.
The Leviathan that is Network Rail. I think one of the points that I picked up is, we do quite a lot of these schemes in and around railway stations near the railway line. With this policy, we're going to be talking to Network Rail a lot more often, because, to be next to a railway station, you might need a bit of their land. You might be impacting on a level crossing. And traditionally, they have been pretty aggressive in their approach in terms of what they like to call shared value, but the rest of us call ransom. And not necessarily, I think, as you put it, James, the quickest and easiest to deal with. I mean, I don't know, but to what extent are they geared up to having to deal with a sort of an influx of people talking to them about planning? And how pragmatic and sensible are they going to be? Because that can be a major block to bringing things forward quickly, which is, of course, what the government want us to do.
And can you have a pre-app with Network Rail like you would with a county highway authority, or is it what are they like to engage with?
Yeah, they will engage with you. It takes a bit of time, and it's finding the right people in the right way. They're not as easy to deal with as someone like National Highways. And National Highways obviously don't have the best reputation, but their engagement at the pre-app stage, they have certain requirements to talk to you. They don't charge you for it, and they turn things around relatively quickly. You probably won't like the answer they give you a lot of the time, but at least you get an answer.
Rebecca, have you had pre-apps with Network Rail on projects?
No, not yet. But obviously, I think it's going to happen more often now with the changes.
The theme you majored on was the point about starting early, planning, thinking of constraints,
Exactly.
thinking about delivery, which is everything that this is about. Yeah, no, I think it'll be very interesting to see how that pans out.
And then I just had a philosophical point as well. So with the road network, public highway, that is a public asset, effectively. It's shared. It is something as a developer you can use to deliver your access and highway works that you need to mitigate your impact or whatever, or provide connectivity. And this is where I'm going to touch on law, and you're going to tell me I'm wrong. But the highway law dates back to the 1600s. It's very old, and obviously it predates any of the law around the railways. With the railways, a lot of the land was secured during Victorian times. I think a lot of it was compulsory purchased.
Yeah.
But that land is not a national asset in the same way, and I can't understand why one is and one isn't. And obviously there's all the safety points, and that's really, really important. But there's an awful lot of land that Network Rail own, which isn't anything to do with the railway. It should be used. There is an opportunity, perhaps, for the role of Network Rail to be rethought, and how railway land is dealt with, which is going to help unlock a lot of these schemes. I don't think anyone's necessarily given that any thought, but Network Rail acting, the majority owned by the government, acting as a private body, ransoming people and trying to extract as much value as possible out of people, doesn't necessarily seem the right way. If National Highways took that approach, or highway authorities, we wouldn't be building anything. That said, and in Network Rail's defence, the money that they do get from developers is reinvested into the railway system.
I think it's one of the points that we talked about earlier, which is it's a fantastic policy. It's a really good policy,
absolutely.
And I think we're it's important that we make that statement very, very clearly. But there might be some buffers that it hits. There are some, there will be some snags. There will be some issues that need to be thought through. I don't want to stop you having philosophical questions. I mean, are there any more?
No. That was it. I just wanted to get that point in.
Yeah, but it is a good one.
I managed to get my every time I talk about anything to do with transport, I have a dig at national highways, so I managed to get that in as well. So thank you,
James. Thank you. Really
Pleasure.
good. Thanks for the quiz. Really, really good. Andy, thank you as well, and Rebecca for this morning, and to everyone out there who's attended. Fantastic questions coming in. Sorry that we've got to cut that short. Have I done enough trailers? 8th of May, we've got Hugh Gibbs coming.
Yep.
He's our next guest from Searchland. So get that in your diary. I've already mentioned Andy and me on Brighton Bandstand on the 7th of June. Free beer, I think, for everyone is what Andy's promising on that day. But I think that probably is it for this morning. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Watch out for the blog that is coming, and look forward to everybody joining us on the 8th. Thank you.